It's 1969. Cairo. A quiet back room of the Egyptian Museum. Dr. Khalil Messiha, an Egyptian physician and amateur archaeologist, is sorting through a box of mislabeled artifacts, objects catalogued decades earlier, filed under bird figurines, and essentially forgotten. He picks up one particular piece. Carved sycamore wood. 39 grams. A little over 7 inches long. And then he notices the tail. It doesn't sit flat, the way a bird's tail feathers would. It stands straight up, vertical, rigid, a perfect dorsal fin. Like something you'd find on a modern glider. Dr. Messiha has a brother who builds model aircraft. He recognizes the geometry immediately. The question that surfaces in that quiet museum room, a question that would go on to divide archaeologists, engineers, and historians for the next 50 years, is this: did someone in ancient Egypt design an object that could fly? The Saqqara bird was first pulled from the earth in 1898, during excavations at the necropolis of Saqqara, one of Egypt's oldest burial sites, a city of the dead stretching across the desert south of Cairo. The tomb where it was found dated to roughly 200 BCE, the late Ptolemaic period. It was tagged, catalogued, and placed in storage. For 70 years, no one with an engineering eye looked at it seriously. That detail alone should trouble you. But the stranger part is still coming. When Messiha examined it in 1969, he noticed several things that set it apart from every other bird carving in the museum's collection. The wings aren't flat, they are slightly curved along the leading edge, what aeronautical engineers call a dihedral angle asterisk, which provides passive stability during gliding flight. The body is tapered in a way that distributes weight toward the nose. And the tail fin, vertical, precise, has no parallel in any decorative Egyptian bird artifact before or since. Messiha presented his findings to the Egyptian Ministry of Culture. The object was reclassified, given its own display case, and a committee was formed to study it further. Then the committee quietly dissolved. The follow-up report was never officially published. In the records I've kept on suppressed archaeological findings, few cases are as plainly documented, and as plainly ignored, as what happened next. Here's what the official story told the world for decades: the Saqqara bird is a ceremonial object, possibly a weather vane, possibly a religious symbol associated with the soul, the Egyptian concept of the *ba*, often depicted as a human-headed bird. It was decorative. It was symbolic. Case closed. But in 2006, a team including aviation expert Simon Sanderson ran the Saqqara bird's dimensions through modern aerodynamic modeling software. The results contradicted the official story in 3 specific ways, and the third finding was the one that raised the most serious questions. First, the wing profile. When Sanderson's team mapped the cross-section of the wings, they found it matched the camber profile of a functional glider wing. Not approximately. Precisely within the tolerances of working model aircraft design. Second, the center of gravity. The weight distribution places the heaviest point, the carved wooden nose, exactly where it needs to be for stable gliding flight. This isn't an accident of carving. It requires either intentional engineering or an extraordinary coincidence. Third, and this is the finding that was buried in a footnote and almost never quoted in mainstream coverage, the object, as it exists today cannot achieve sustained glide. It's missing something. There's a flat, horizontal surface that aerodynamic models suggest should be present at the rear of the fuselage. A horizontal stabilizer. A small rear wing. In other words, what we have may be incomplete. 3 records I'll show you in the next 2 minutes overturn the assumption that this is simply a carving, and the third one raises a question about what else might have been buried in that tomb. Let's talk about what was found *with the Saqqara bird. The tomb it came from contained a collection of objects that archaeologists in 1898 grouped loosely under the heading of ritual items. Most were catalogued and studied thoroughly. but a handful of smaller carved pieces, described vaguely in the original excavation notes as additional wooden models of uncertain purpose, were processed quickly and distributed across museum storage. What I found in the archives of that original excavation, at least 2 other wooden objects from the same tomb were described as having unusual aerodynamic shapes. Neither was retained for serious study. One was reportedly damaged during transport. The other's current location is listed as unknown. This may mean nothing. It may mean the Saqqara Bird was one of several similar objects, possibly a set, possibly pieces of a larger design. We don't know. Because we no longer have them. Now. Here is where the history becomes genuinely uncomfortable. Ancient Egypt had models of almost everything. Boats found in tombs were functional scale models of real boats. Food models represented real food. Servant figures represented real servants. Egyptian funerary practice was grounded in the belief that the model asterisk stood in for asterisk the real thing. If the Saqqara Bird is a model, and its construction quality strongly suggests it was built with precision and care, then what was the real thing it was standing in for? This is the question that the ceremonial symbol explanation sidesteps entirely. Because the *BA* soul bird of Egyptian theology has a human head, not a streamlined wooden nose and a vertical stabilizer. Few researchers who've pushed this question have received institutional support for further study. The Cairo Museum's official position hasn't changed since the 1970s. And the aerodynamic modeling done in 2006 was funded privately, not by any university archaeology department or government body. Why the resistance? That's a question I can raise here, but I won't pretend to answer it cleanly. What we can say with confidence, the Saqqara Bird is not a standard bird figurine. Its geometry is aerodynamically non-trivial. Multiple independent engineers have confirmed that its wing profile is consistent with gliding flight. The vertical tail fin has no decorative precedent in Egyptian art. And the original excavation may have included companion objects that are now lost. What we cannot say, that ancient Egyptians built full-scale flying aircraft. The evidence doesn't support that conclusion. What it supports is more precise, and, in some ways, more interesting. It supports the possibility that someone, in Egypt, around 200 BCE, understood the basic principles of aerodynamic lift. Whether through observation of birds, through experimentation with thrown objects, or through a tradition of knowledge we have no other record of, someone carved an object that flies. Not as a symbol. Not as decoration. As a demonstration of a principle. Whether that principle was ever scaled up, whether it was ever applied, whether it was part of a larger body of technical knowledge that simply didn't survive, those questions remain open. Genuinely, honestly open. And that, in the end, is what makes the Saqqara Bird worth keeping in the record. The object sits today in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, in a display case it wasn't given until 1969, 70 years after it was pulled from the earth. It weighs 39 grams. It fits in one hand. And if you reshape the rear fuselage slightly, add a small horizontal stabilizer, and give it a gentle throw, it glides. If you've encountered another artifact that belongs in these archives, leave it in the comments. The archivist is still collecting. Bell subscribe for a new mystery every week. https://youtube.com/@lostepochs-p1q